important for us to understand that in large measure, we were not taught about those Africans who won in the battle against oppression and slavery. Now, Herbert Aptheker tells us in the book American Negro Slave Revolts, he tells us that there were over 250 documented revolts. In other words, back during that time, Europeans were very meticulous in documenting these things because they were trying to put things in place to make sure that these things never happened again, that revolts never occurred. So they documented whenever there was a revolt. Well, we know that there was Gaspar Yanga and Nanny of the Maroons down in Mexico. And we know about the Haitian Revolution, which we'll talk about a little bit later with Boukman Dutty and Dessalines and Toussaint Louverture. Probably the most well-known revolt that many of us have heard of would be that of Nat Turner, okay? The three most prominent revolts amongst Africans in America was Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, and Gabriel Prosser. And then there was also the Stono Rebellion in South Carolina. But in large measure, we were never taught about those Africans who actually won their freedom and created sovereign maroon communities. We love General Nat Turner and Denmark Vesey and Gabriel Prosser for the sacrifice that they made. Certainly, these are monumental Africans. But in the end, in their quest for liberation, they were killed. But you and I need to understand that there were those who were successful, who defeated their captors and went on to establish free, liberated, and sovereign communities and even nations. Okay? The other thing that the other myth that I want to put to rest and dispel is the notion that we didn't fight back. In my research, one of the things that I've come to understand is that we were always either planning a revolt, in the midst of a revolt, or coming out of a revolt. Remember, there are over 250 documented revolts in American history. That tells us it was at least one was happening per year. And so we were always either planning a revolt, in the midst of a revolt, or coming out of a revolt. We didn't just accept our enslavement and lay down and allow it to happen. Certainly there were those Africans who were terrorized into such a state of fear and compliance that they did, but overwhelmingly, we never accepted our captivity. We never accepted enslavement. We were always either planning a revolt, in the midst of a revolt, or coming out of a revolt. And so I'd like to suggest that we not accept a lot of the oppressive circumstances that we see going on today, that we need to study the mentality of the Maroons. How were they able to overthrow the yoke of oppression? How were they able to establish their own communities and even countries and establish and maintain their sovereignty? These are the things that I want us to think about, because you can get so caught up in seeking equity that you give up the notion of achieving sovereignty. And sovereignty is complete self-sufficiency. But I'll give a more comprehensive definition of sovereignty a little bit later.
One thing we have to admit is our ancestors were incredible human beings. Our ancestors were incredible human beings. To experience the conditions that they experienced, to experience the torture that they experienced, and still had the will to fight back. Now, we know all of them didn't, but a good enough number of them didn't for white people to create something called drapetomania. Drapetomania. You have a mental illness because you don't want to be enslaved. Our ancestors faced worse conditions than we could ever imagine. But somehow, somewhere, they still found the mind, the spirit, and the heart to fight back. So my question for this video, for us today, for us to talk about in this discussion is, What's the maroon beaten out of us over the years? Because we gone from a time to where we had a number of people who are willing to fight back. Now we're in a time where we have a number of people who talk about fighting back, but how many of us really have the heart, the mind, and the soul to fight back? I want to start with you, PC. What's the maroon? You already know. What's the maroon beaten out of us? Why don't we fight? And of course, all fighting back isn't physical confrontation. But if it has to go there, it got to go there. But why don't we fight back today?
Well, I'm answer the first part of your question. Yeah, the maroon was beaten out of us. And I'll be honest with you. Well, I'm gonna put it like this: the maroon was beaten out of those who weren't maroons back then. So when we think about the uprisings, we think about slave revolts. The majority of the plantations didn't take part in those fights. Those were small bands of brothers and sisters who
Mm-hmm.
got just sick and tired of being sick and tired. Now, uh, when I think about what they did, they were willing to forsake all of this and live on the land. They were able to go into places that they knew the white man couldn't follow. They were able to, um, they lived a hard living, but they were able to dig deep down to their roots, and therefore they were able to, um, you know, sacrifice, but to make sure they sacrifice for the sake of their nation. We don't have a lot of that today. Um, Most of the people who you see out there, they have no intention on really taking on our open enemy. So they talk a good game. Some of them slide into the game of politics. Some of them slide to the game of scholarship. Very few are willing to do the grassroots work necessary to liberate a people that's under this type of oppression. Um, in some way, shape, or form, the majority of Black people want to become part of this union, part of this nation. They want to assimilate, and many have. And their biggest issue is that they have their assimilation, their attempts to assimilate has not been accepted. So I'm gonna leave it at that for now.
All right. Patrick, same question. Was the
Same
maroon fight?
answer.
Was the maroon beaten out of us? Why don't we
Um,
fight back?
so I agree with everything PC just said. I want to take a detour real quick. Because I want to talk about this is something that's been coming up a lot lately, and this bit is a perfect segue into it. Just a brief detour. Um, Herbert was a white guy, and the guy that wrote the book that was being referenced in the
Yeah,
video that was played.
by Dr. Chike Akua. Yeah, this is a video
Mm-hmm.
about Dr. Chike Akua is referencing Herbert, the white guy.
Right. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because nowadays it's become popular and acceptable for people in all black spaces or pro black spaces to reject information from white people as if white people don't have anything to contribute to the discussion. And the fact of the matter is, without white people, there would be no discussion. And that's literally and figuratively. A lot of the work that our great ancestors and great scholars and master teachers, the John Henry Clarks and the Dr. Benz, and a lot of their work is based off material written by white scholars, Chancellor Williams and blah blah blah. So I want to point that out because I go back to again the situation that Professor Carl was in. I think I was more traumatized by that than PC was because I keep bringing it up. Um, the situation that Professor Carl was in, where he was trying to talk about the rise of the feminist movement, and he played the video by the white ladies, and they fucking lambasted him. Um,
Mm-hmm.
White people do have a role to play in these conversations, insofar as the information that they bring to the table. It's our job to interpret the information differently than maybe it was intended to be interpreted, which is what Chancellor Williams and a lot of those scholars did. But that's one thing. And I wanted to make that point because I'm hearing that argument more and more and more. We don't need to be reading anything from white people. We need to stick to our scholars. No, you need to read something from everybody.
Well, Dr. John Henry Clark said, study any and everything you can get your hands on, so you can get as many points of views and as many vantage points of the information as possible. A lot of our scholars have said that.
And I'm just bringing it up again because, like I said, that point has been brought up a lot over the last, I say, 2 or 3 years. And I don't see anybody really pushing back on that narrative. If anything, the black community seems to be embracing that narrative, and that is a very damaging narrative to embrace. The second thing is the direct answer to your question is I think that there are no, the maroon was beaten out of us, so we'll say that. But I agree with PC. The maroon wasn't beaten out of us from the perspective of people just don't want to fight. One of the things we got to accept is that the masses of black people have always been looking for the easy way to life.
Right.
Like PC said, there's always been a small groups of people here or there pushing back. But in mass, one of the reasons we were selected for slavery, if you listen to the journals of various white journal explorers and whatnot, is that black people had a propensity to accept their lot in life that was driven by their spiritual beliefs. They knew that a good chunk of us would accept our position. And that's why we were so successful being enslaved, more successful than all of the other people they tried to enslave that ended up going extinct.
Right.
And I think that's a truth that we have to come to grips with, is that fundamentally we did accept a lot of things, and we still do. And that's part of the work that has to be done. So I think for those small groups of people that were willing to fight back and do this and that and the third, they accepted a lot of things too. And they're the ones that I think were really beating up the descendants of those people who, when you see them now, they're happy with their small corner of the pie. Even though it's still, for the most part, they've still assimilated in a lot of regards compared to what their ancestors did. But they hold their ancestors up as proud stories of something that they come from. Yeah, you come from it. You didn't do it.
Yeah.
So even in that, there's been kind of a lie that's been perpetuated about the greatness of me based off work done by those who had sex and produced me. So I think there's a lot to get into in this discussion.
Well, yeah, because I was scrolling through YouTube and I found this is just a clip of a whole video where Dr. Chike Akua is talking about what he called it, the maroon mentality. And I picked it because we do a lot of, we said this before and I said it again, we do a lot of talking these days. Of course, I've always said black people's superpower, if we were superheroes, our superpower would be talking jump. You know, we would be the Hawkeye of the Avengers.
You jive turkey.
You know what I'm saying? And I said jive turkey, why you ain't fall? Because you just talk, right? And so, you know, you said, you hit on something, Pat, something that I was going to bring up is we do continuously live off of the things that our ancestors have done. And we hold them up proudly, and we talk about them as if we've done them. We've gotten real comfortable with our place in America. Are there those who still fight back in various ways in the best way they can? Yes. We're not talking about those people. Matter of fact, We want to give a salute and a shout out to everybody who's actually doing something, some kind of resistance in the best way that they can. We're giving those people shouts out. But the problem is those people's fighting back has already been compromised before they were born because of the assimilation and the compromisation the compromising rather that we have with white America. You can't defeat that which you cooperate with. Like we talked about last week, like there's no example for what we're trying to do in the manner and what we're trying to do in the positions to people who've been in positions that we've been in. So we're doing something, we're attempting to do something that hasn't been done. But there's still a lot that we can learn from our ancestors. Like the San Basilio di Palenque. How did they, because how were they able to build that and maintain it for so many years? I think we know about the rebellions, but do we really understand the rebellions? Do we really study the rebellions? Do we really get into the total mindset and the tactics and the strategies and the things that they needed to do? Because first of all, let's just be real. If all the power went out today, a lot of us would be in trouble. A lot of us would be in trouble because we don't have basic survival skills. So not having basic survival skills limits us in being able to fight back in a way because we're so dependent upon the same people that we're going to be fighting against. See, one thing that helped them was the self-sufficiency, them being able to live off of the land, them being able to okay, we're going to run away from these plantations and we're going to hunt, we're going to fish, and we're going to plant things, we're going to pick the things from the trees. We know the terrain. We know the plants. We understand our surrounding. We so far behind, and we so far our knowledge base is so far off. It's crazy. Like, what if the power go out today? We in trouble. So how do you fight back? Because we talk a lot. We don't like white supremacy, but white supremacy isn't just going to stop because we don't like it. White supremacy isn't going to stop because we say it should stop. White supremacy isn't going to stop because it hurts our feelings. So either white people are going to have to choose to not continue the system of white supremacy, or we're going to have to fight back. But the problem is trying to fight back. We don't have the basic things that we need from the beginning. The mindset, the spirit, the heart.
I think, well, and I'll say this, one of the things I disagree with from the video is that sovereign communities were created. I believe there were a lot of self-sufficient communities created. There weren't any sovereign communities created. Sovereignty is something that Black people in America, anyways, we've never come close to sniffing that out. And there are reasons for that, which I don't know that this is the show for that, but so I disagree with them on that. But we did create self-sufficient communities, and this is the interesting thing. Even with that, now what we consider self-sufficient nowadays, like the skills required to get to self-sufficiency nowadays, are different than what was required to get to self-sufficiency then.
Right.
So, like the basics of it is the same: food, water, shelter. That's the same.
Right.
But how do you get food, water, and shelter? That's kind of changed over the decades. And then you look at the fact that most Black people do live in the concrete jungle, not a wooden one. So even to that, you gotta maneuver different, because I was in a survival skills course here in Charlotte not too long ago. The most interesting thing, right? They were teaching people how to survive in the woods, in a set of woods that had a set of trees and waters and other things that are not within 100 miles of Charlotte. What are you teaching survival? Like, what kind of survival skills are these? So we're not even having those discussions where we're teaching people about the relevant resources in their areas. What type of trees
Right.
grow in your area? What type of insects? What type of soil do you have? What can you grow in that soil? Not all soil can grow stuff. You know what I'm saying? How do you maintain the soil where you're at? How far do you need to dig to get into the underground waterways where you can create a well from the aquifers? Those types of things, right? Like, and that's going to vary from location to location. So even when we're talking about self-sufficiency, we're not talking about it on a level where people that are listening really understand what that means in their area, because PC could be a survival guru up there in the Pennsylvania area, and he could probably, survive anywhere in that state. But you move him down to Florida, and he got 2 weeks before he asked out. It's a different land.
Oh yeah, you're gonna get chlamydia.
so I think we gotta have those discussions on that level too. Like, you need to, when you're talking about up and relocating, right? Like, how do you go into another area, like understanding what's native to that area, what's invasive in that area, blah blah blah. But so, and then even when we get back to the maroon colonies, I think, again, I go back to one of the challenges with all of this, understanding the maroon nature of it all, is that there aren't enough critical thinkers. Black people will look at, say, what happened with the MOVE movement in 1985, and they'll try to replicate that exactly to the letter, not realizing that it's 2023. It's not the same. Or they'll look at what the Gullah Geechees did, and they'll try to replicate that exactly to the letter. And then wonder why it ain't moving.